Isochron Scepter. This 2-mana artifact lets you imprint an instant or sorcery with mana value 2 or less onto it, and you can pay 2 generic and tap it to copy and cast the imprinted card without paying its mana cost. In other words, lets you cast a cheap spell every single turn. If you play Commander, it's likely you've come up against this card. However, it also used to be a powerhouse in 60-card formats, but it's been a very long time since that's been the case, so long that many Magic players today have no idea how dominant it used to be. So that begs the question, how good was Isochron Scepter, actually? This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Hi everyone, I'm Isochron, and this is the 4th episode of a new series that releases every Wednesday. These videos have done well enough that this series will be continuing into June, although not during the first week of the month, since I'll be doing my set review for Modern Horizons 3. In this series, I take a deep dive into a single card and discuss its competitive history. So far, I've looked at Serra Angel, Mog Fanatic, Icy Manipulator, and Hypnotic Spectre, so check out those videos if you haven't seen them. I always run a poll to let viewers decide the topic of these videos, and this time I pitted 2 powerhouse artifacts against one another, Cursed Scroll and Isochron Scepter. The poll was pretty close, but in the end the Scepter came out on top. So let's answer that question that so many of you want to know the answer to. How good was Isochron Scepter, actually? Isochron Scepter was originally printed in 2003's Mirrodin. While it didn't see any play in Mirrodin Block or Standard, formats dominated by super fast affinity decks, it did almost immediately see play in Extended. Extended was a rotating format that had the last several years of sets in it. Basically, it was Standard but with even more sets. At Pro Tour New Orleans in 2003, Tomohiro Yokosuka's Psychotog deck finished in the top 8, and it was packing a full 4 copies of the Scepter. Psychotog decks are control decks that usually use the eponymous creature as their main win condition. If you have a big enough graveyard and enough cards in hand, it can get massive. The deck already ran lots of cheap instants and sorceries, so the Scepter was a good fit, and it even gave the deck another potential win condition. Several instants and sorceries in the deck were great to imprint on the Scepter, like Counterspell or Accumulated Knowledge, but Fire and Ice was the sweetest card to imprint on the Scepter. It's a split card, which means you can choose to cast one side or the other. The Fire side costs 1 generic and a red and divides 2 damage among 1 or 2 targets, and the Ice side taps a permanent and draws you a card. When it was imprinted, you could choose one side or the other to cast too. That kind of repeatable modality is very powerful, and obviously if your Psychotog wasn't getting the job done, you could lock the game down and win by casting Fire over and over again. Abusing split cards with Isochron Scepter would go on to be a big part of what made it so successful. By 2004, even more Scepter-centric decks began to emerge in Extended. These decks were still packing Fire and Ice, Accumulated Knowledge, and Counterspell as nice cards to imprint onto the Scepter, but these Scepter decks now had a new, most important card that it wanted to imprint, and that was Auram's Chant. This instant makes it so a player can't cast spells this turn, and if you kick it, their creatures can't attack either. And of course, if you've imprinted the Chant onto the Scepter, that means you can kick it every time you cast it too. While Tomohiro Yokosuka's Psychotog deck did have an Auram's Chant it could grab from the sideboard, it was far from the deck's main game plan. But for the so-called Scepter-Chant decks that emerged on the scene in 2004, it was the deck's central strategy. Now Scepter decks had a very real lock. The earliest versions of the deck looked to win the game using Exalted Angel, but with time, Scepter-Chant decks stopped playing creatures entirely. In 2005, Ryuichi Arita top-8'd Pro Tour Los Angeles with his take on Scepter-Chant, and it was now entirely creatureless. All the usual suspects were available to imprint onto the Scepter, but there was one new addition: Brain Freeze. In many cases, milling your opponent every turn could win you the game more quickly than trying to burn them out with fire, especially because you were often casting at least one other spell on most turns. The deck ran one freeze in the main deck and another in the sideboard to be grabbed with Cunning Wish. The sideboard also featured a 4th Auram's Chant, so the deck was super consistent overall. It could grab its lock pieces when it needed to, and find its win condition when it needed to as well. Scepter-Chant decks continued to look like this through 2005 and 2006, and they found great success, and by 2007, the deck was leaning even harder on its prison elements. At Pro Tour Valencia in 2007, Yuya Watanabe wasn't satisfied with having one lock in the deck, so he also put the counter top combo into his deck. Now, not only could you shut your opponent down from doing anything on their turn every single turn, even if they did cast something, there was a good chance that the counterbalance top combo would counter it. You could use the top to stack the top of your deck and make sure the card you revealed would counter your opponent's spell because it had the same mana value. The deck also used Teferi Mage of Zhalfir, which didn't allow your opponent to cast spells on your turn, and when combined with an imprinted Orum's Chant that you're casting during every one of your opponent's turns, that means that they would basically never be able to cast anything. However, 2007 was the last time that Isochron Scepter was a factor in Extended, and it would never again be as important of a card in any format as it was in Extended between 2003 and 2007. However, between 2005 and 2007, the Scepter was also fairly successful in Legacy. At the 2005 Legacy Championship, Matt Holman top-8'd the event with a Zoo deck that was packing Isochron Scepter, and you can see Fire and Ice and the Scepter are part of the game plan, and Lightning Bolt and Swords to Plowshares were also pretty sweet when imprinted on the Scepter. This is more or less what Isochron Scepter's time in Legacy looked like. It was a strong support card for a variety of decks between 2005 and 2007, but unlike in Extended, there were never decks built around Isochron Scepter in the format, and after 2007, Isochron Scepter went quiet for quite some time. That is, until 2011, when the creation of the Modern format breathed new life into it. Modern is, of course, a format that still exists today. All sets released from 9th edition forward are legal in the format, so it has a very large card pool, although back in 2011 the card pool was considerably smaller. Before Modern became a thing in paper, they tested the format out on Magic Online, and one of the decks to win one of the first tournaments was all about the Scepter. Straka 3 played a largely blue-white control deck at the event. While Fire and Ice wasn't available in the format, and neither was Orum's Chant, this deck did have some analogs. It used Silence in place of Orum's Chant. It can only shut down spells, but that was often plenty to get a nice lock going. In place of Fire and Ice, you could imprint some other really nice cheap spells like Lightning Helix, but probably the sweetest thing this deck could do was imprint Research and Development. The way the rules worked at the time, you could imprint Research and Development because the Research side was 2 mana, but you could still choose to cast the Development side when you activated the Scepter. So if you're casting Development on turn 3, you're putting your opponent in a pretty ugly spot. They either have to give you cards or 3/1 bodies, and it's really a pick your poison scenario. They don't really have a good choice to make, especially in the early game. In 2012, the Modern decks that started to perform well at events looked a little bit different. This is because Innistrad had come out, and along with it came 2 new powerful spell payoffs, Delver of Secrets and Snapcaster Mage. Delver is a creature who loves instants and sorceries, since if you reveal one from your library during your upkeep, it becomes a 3/2 flyer. Meanwhile, Snapcaster Mage lets you flashback spells from your graveyard. These 3 powerful spell payoffs combine to form the Delver Scepter deck, where you can see the theme of abusing split cards continued. You could put odds and ends or hide and seek on the Scepter, once again gaining access to powerful modality, and with odds and ends, you even got to cheat a bit on mana. Decks packing the trio of Snapcaster, Delver, and Isochron Scepter continued to excel in Modern in 2012 and 2013. However, by the end of 2013, Isochron Scepter was no longer seeing play in the format. Delver's Snapcaster decks were still all over the place, but the Scepter was no longer used by them. This was largely because Modern had become progressively faster and more combo-oriented. If there was ever any hope that maybe the Scepter would once again be successful in Modern, it was all related to the Scepter's ability to abuse split cards. But even that little glimmer of hope was extinguished with the release of Amonkhet in 2017, a set with split cards where they decided to issue a rule change that significantly weakened the Scepter. As we've seen, the ability to imprint split cards onto Isochron Scepter was a big part of what made it a powerful card in both Extended and Modern. But starting in 2017, the mana value of split cards now became the combined mana value of both sides. This meant you couldn't even imprint Fire and Ice anymore, and you certainly couldn't imprint Research and Development or Beckon Call and cast a more expensive spell. Since that rules change, Isochron Scepter has largely been silent in all formats apart from Commander. However, we don't have to end on such a downer. There's some very recent good news for Isochron Scepter. Orum's Chant is in Modern Horizons 3. Scepter-Chant has never been possible in Modern, and while Silence can do an okay impression of the Chant is strictly better, and it might mean that Scepter-Chant decks could emerge for the first time in Modern. I myself am a little bit skeptical, given that the Scepter hasn't even seen Fringe play since 2017. I don't think one new imprint option, even one as good as Orum's Chant, is going to be enough to make a difference. What do you think? Do Scepter-Chant decks have a chance in post-Modern Horizons 3 Modern? Let me know in the comments. Let's close things out with a look at the numbers, as this can help us understand the question, how good was Isochron Scepter actually? In all, it achieved 5 Pro Tour top 8s and 17 Grand Prix and Regional top 8s. Overall, Isochron Scepter was a format-defining card in Extended between 2003 and 2007, and it also made significant impacts on Legacy between 2005 and 2007, and Modern from 2011 to 2013. Overall, Isochron Scepter wasn't quite as dominant as the other cards we've looked at in this series, at least not when it comes to competitive Magic, but at its peak in Extended, it wouldn't have been a stretch to say it was one of the best cards in the format. And who knows, maybe it's about to have a resurgence thanks to Orum's Chant in Modern Horizons 3. Do you want to get your hands on an Isochron Scepter, or maybe pre-order Orum's Chant for Modern Horizons 3? If so, check out the description where you can find links to the Card Kingdom store, including a direct link for the Scepter and Orum's Chant. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. If you want to have a say in the next episode of this series, don't forget to vote on the community tab. And if you need to catch up on this series, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.